Head over to BoardGamePrices.com to find the best price on Corinth and thousands of other games. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're going back in time into an area known as Corinth. And there we're going to be gathering different resources and gold and goats and creating buildings and moving our merchant around and doing all sorts of things in this dice game where it's essentially a roll and write game. Now this is from Days of Wonder. It is for 2 to 4 players. Let me show you how it's played. I'll see you on the other side. In Corinth, each player is going to get a score sheet, and over the course of the game, they're going to be filling this in depending on the different dice that they draft and what they decide to do with those dice. Now each round, the start player is going to roll all the white dice. They're going to place all the dice with the highest number where the coins are, and then they're going to step all the dice up from lowest to highest. So the ones in this case, the twos, the threes, the fours, and sometimes there'll be some spots that are empty. There just aren't enough of the different values there. Now when selecting dice, some of these do different things. For example, these ones are the different goods that you can select in this area of your sheet. And when you select one of these, you'll be able to cross off a certain amount of them depending on how many dice are there. So this is this sort of blue area here. Let's say the first player takes these. They're taking 4 of these dice. The numbers don't matter, how many dice does. So we can take 4 of those. And because they did those 4 dice, they're going to be able to select 4 of these to cross off. Now they can start in any one of these, but once they start in one, they have to keep crossing off ones in that section until it's completed. But in this case, they got 4, which is cool. So they can cross off all 4 of these. And when you finish an area, you circle. That's going to be points you'll get at the end of the game. However, if we only had gotten 3 of them, we would have crossed out 3. And then next time we took dice, we would have had to have started here to complete this before we went to another one. And it's a little bit of a race because if you're able to cross off these 3 and get 5 and these 2 and get 3, if you're the first one to complete all 3, you get these points and everybody else has to cross it off and they can't get it. Then each of the other players are going to go clockwise, taking dice and activating these different spots. Now the dice from all of these resource sections all work the same way that I just mentioned. If you take gold, you'll take the amount of dice that you did and you'll circle gold. If you took the goats, you'll take the amount of dice and circle the amount of goats. These are 2 forms of currency you'll use throughout the game because at the end of your turn, you can spend a combination of gold and or goats to build one of these 4 different buildings. Like this one costs 2 goats, this one's 2 gold and a goat, and so on and so forth. Now these buildings give you different abilities. We'll talk more about those later. Now instead of taking these and actually activating this section with the amount of dice, like I would get 2 purples, you can instead take this and use the numbers of the dice to activate and move your steward. So in this case, regardless of the amount of dice, these are 3s, so I'm going to be able to move 3. And this would allow me to move my steward like 1, 2, 3, and that's the 3rd one, which would allow me to cross this off, which would allow me to get this, and if I'm the first one, I would get this as mentioned before. So the steward's going to help you get different things there. Now rounds are tracked down here. Each time the starting player takes a turn, they cross that off. So it's going to be a certain amount of rounds depending on the amount of players. Also, at the beginning of your turn, when you roll the dice, if you're the start player, you can cross off a certain amount of gold, up between 1 and 3 of those. And for each of those, you add one of these yellow dice, which gives you a better chance of filling up the entire board. Now, if we took these like normal, we would get 3 gold, because that's what this space does. We'd get 3 because there's 3 dice there. Now, regardless of if the start player takes this or not, let's say they took the 2 goats down here, the yellow die gets removed. Only the player that paid for it can take them. And then things progress like normal. And you can continue this to the end of the game. Now, there's a few other rules, like when you're moving around, you can actually go -1 or +1 what you're supposed to move by spending gold. And the buildings do different things, like if you get this building for 2 goats, when you take coins, you take 2 more. Here, you can move 1 more, 1 less, like I just explained, without spending gold. This one allows you to get 1 more resource than you normally would, and this one gets you 3 points for each of the other buildings you've built. Also, with the steward here, if you move into one of these corners, you actually take the number of points is equal to the amount of circles that you had, and sometimes you'll get +1. So they moved 1, then they moved another 1, then they moved 2. So we have 3 circles, that's 3 points, plus a +1 is 4. But then if you go to another one, it continues to add. So this one actually had 2 more circles, so you'd add from 4, you'd get 6. So, and you can get to this other one. It's another way to get points is moving around. And the yellow ones actually get you a yellow die at the beginning of each of your turns. And then you simply count up all your points. Whoever has the most is the winner. And gold and goats get you 2 times the amount that you haven't crossed out. Now this is a Days of Wonder production, so obviously, like many and all of their other ones, Corinth has good looking art. I mean, you look at it, the graphic design looks good, the art looks good, on the table things look nice, and that's just what you've come to know and love from Days of Wonder, and this one is no different. I like the sort of spreading of the dice up the board, meaning the higher ones are harder to get. That's the most interesting part of this game, I feel, is as the dice are rolled, you spread them out, you're like, oh gosh, okay, well, which one is most relevant, has the most dice, which ones can I move the most up on the track, and the ones lower, that are easier to get are worth less points, and so on and so forth. So you got to sort of press your luck, where even if you get the yellow one, or the goldish one, it's the hardest one to get. So if you start pressing your luck on one of those, you may or may not get that finish and get the points towards the end. You may have to, buy some of those yellow dice to try to spread it out some more and things like that. That was the most interesting part of the game. And I did like that you're pushing your luck to finish that section, because even if it's not one of those higher sections, if you don't finish it, you don't get the points. So starting one late is another thing like that. Where it's like, oh, here's one of 3 that I've got to cross off. I just crossed off 1. Do I think I'll get 2 of them next turn? It's the last round. So, or should I spend my time doing something else? And so that's pretty interesting. I'm trying to think about, the resources versus the merchant versus what you're going to get versus building buildings. And there's a decent amount to think about here. But overall, let me move to the negatives. Now, this was a re-implementation of Isfahan from back in 2006. And from what I gather, I have not played that original game. From what I gather, they did sort of streamline and change some things to make this better. But for me, it still sort of felt a little dated. Because these days, there's a lot of roll and write games out. It's a very crowded genre. 2 years ago, there weren't that many roll and write games. Now, it's like the thing. Like, they're all over the place. We're almost getting too many of them. Where back in the day, if this came out in 2006 or even 3 years ago, I would have been like, wow, this is really good. But now that there's so many good ones out, it's hard to stand out of the pack. And this one, for me, did not do that. There's no solo mode, which I think in roll and write games is sort of almost a staple and almost necessary these days to compete in that space. Because again, there's so many of them. Having a solo mode is really important in these games. Also, the game felt a little samey from game to game. I'm pretty much doing the same types of things. The puzzling, it's not sort of a puzzly game where you're trying to figure out where to put things. It's like, oh, I can go down this track, or I can go down this track. And so for me, it didn't have as much replayability as some of the other ones. So with that being said, it looks nice. It's not a bad game, but it's not one that stood out of the pack for me either. And in a crowded field, that's what you need to do these days. So that is what I think about Corinth. This video was shot on a Game Topper, the ultimate gaming accessory. After successfully fulfilling their first Kickstarter, Game Toppers are taking the world by storm. Now you can get your own portable gaming top by participating in Game Topper's Kickstarter 2.0 starting June 25th, 2019. New styles, new sizes, and amazing new game mats. Go to GameToppersLLC.com to enter a full Game Topper system valued over $1,000 to also bring you to the Kickstarter project page and to late pledge.